The little girl didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just lifted her hand, thumb trapped under 4 fingers, and begged for rescue without a sound. And the moment the Mafia boss saw that signal, something snapped inside him, and he moved so fast even his own men couldn't stop him. But what he found when he reached her, that's where everything really starts. If you're hooked in and want to enjoy this story, go ahead and subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see where everyone's watching. Plus, tomorrow I've got another incredible story lined up, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Alright, back to the story. It happened on a rain-slicked street downtown at dusk. Headlights reflected off wet pavement, pedestrians wove around each other, car horns echoed between buildings, and in the middle of all that noise, a little girl in a yellow dress walked with a terrible, unnatural stillness, like she was trying not to look afraid. Beside her, a tattooed man kept one hand locked around her wrist, too close, too controlling, and every time she slowed down, his fingers tightened until her small hand turned pale. No one noticed. No one cared. Except the man stepping out of a black convoy surrounded by armed bodyguards, Antonio Nelson, the city's most feared mafia boss. The little girl saw him. Their eyes met for 1 second. And in that single second, she lifted her hand to her chest and made a silent signal. A signal Antonio recognized instantly. The same rescue gesture victims are taught to use when they're being taken by someone they don't know. His bodyguards frowned. Antonio froze. Because a girl that young doesn't make that signal by accident. And the man holding her wasn't her father. He wasn't even pretending to be. Antonio's lead bodyguard, Leo, was mid-sentence about their next shipment when he noticed his boss had stopped moving entirely. So the port authority says they need another week to clear the boss? Antonio didn't respond. His eyes were locked on something across the street, tracking movement through the crowd with the focused intensity of a predator spotting wounded prey. Leo followed his gaze and saw them. A man in a faded denim jacket, tattoos visible on his forearm, walking quickly through the evening rush with a little girl in a yellow dress whose steps were too stiff, too controlled. "Boss, what?" "Follow them," Antonio said quietly. "Stay back. Don't let them see you." Leo knew better than to ask questions. He gestured to the other 2 bodyguards, and they began moving through the crowd, keeping distance but maintaining visual contact. Antonio followed 5 paces behind, his long black coat trailing as he cut through the stream of pedestrians like a shark through dark water. The girl looked back once. Her eyes found Antonio's again, and this time there was something different in them, not just fear, but a desperate, calculated hope, like she'd thrown a message in a bottle into the ocean and was praying someone would find it. She raised her hand again, slowly, deliberately, thumb tucked into her palm, 4 fingers folding over it. 3 seconds. Then her hand dropped. Antonio's blood turned cold. He'd seen that signal in law enforcement briefings, in security training, in public awareness campaigns. A silent way to communicate distress when speaking wasn't safe, when screaming would get you hurt, when your only option was to hope someone trained was watching. The fact that this little girl knew it meant someone had taught her well. The fact that she was using it meant she was in immediate danger. The tattooed man noticed the girl looking back. He jerked her forward roughly, leaning down to hiss something in her ear. She flinched, her whole body recoiling, but she didn't cry out. Smart girl, Antonio thought grimly. She knows making noise will make things worse. The man turned suddenly, pulling the girl toward a side street narrower, dimmer, with fewer witnesses. A street where a child's screams wouldn't carry. Antonio's pace quickened. Leo appeared at his shoulder. "Boss, he's heading for the alley between Morrison and 5th. "I know." Antonio's voice was dangerously calm now, the tone his men had learned to recognize as the moment before violence became inevitable. "Block the exit. No one gets past you." Leo nodded and gestured to the others. They split off, moving to positions that would seal the alley shut. Antonio watched the man drag the girl into the shadowed passageway between 2 buildings. He didn't run, didn't shout, didn't draw his weapon. He simply walked into the darkness after them, his steps measured and certain. Because Antonio Nelson had built his empire on instinct, on reading situations faster than other men could draw breath, and every instinct he possessed was screaming the same thing. That little girl was fighting for her life, and he was the only person in this entire city who'd noticed. The alley swallowed him whole. Damp concrete, rusted dumpsters, the smell of rot and stale rain. The man had pulled the girl deeper into the shadows, near a loading dock that hadn't been used in years. Antonio's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. "Let her go." Antonio Nelson didn't wait a second. The tattooed man spun around, his hand instinctively tightening around the girl's wrist. His eyes widened when he saw Antonio standing at the alley entrance, tall, imposing, his black suit cut sharp enough to draw blood. Behind him, 3 bodyguards materialized from the shadows like ghosts, blocking every possible escape route. The man's face cycled through emotions in seconds. Surprise, confusion, then something that tried desperately to look like indignation. "This is my daughter," he said, his voice rough but attempting confidence. "We're just cutting through to get home." Antonio didn't move, didn't blink. He simply stood there, studying the man with the kind of cold, surgical focus that had kept him alive for 20 years, in a business where hesitation meant death. "No," Antonio said quietly. "She's not." The man's jaw tightened. "Look, I don't know who you think you are. I know exactly who I am." Antonio took one step forward. Just one. But the weight of that single movement made the air in the alley feel heavier, more dangerous. "The question is, do you know who you're talking to?" The man's eyes darted to the bodyguards, then back to Antonio. Recognition flickered across his face, the kind of recognition that came from seeing someone's photograph in a police file, or hearing their name whispered in the kinds of places where criminals went to drink away their nightmares. Antonio Nelson. The man's face went pale, but he recovered quickly, squaring his shoulders in a poor imitation of bravery. "I don't care who you are. This is my kid, and you need to back off before this becomes a problem." "It already is a problem," Antonio said, his voice dropping even lower. "Because your daughter made a distress signal. Twice. The international rescue gesture taught to children in case they're taken by someone they don't know." The girl's eyes went wide, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. The man's grip loosened for just a fraction of a second, and she immediately tried to pull away. He jerked her back viciously, and her small cry of pain echoed off the brick walls. That sound, that tiny, broken whimper, ignited something murderous in Antonio's chest. His hand moved inside his coat. Leo shifted forward, ready. But Antonio held up one finger weight, and instead turned his attention to the girl. "Sweetheart," he said, his voice transforming into something impossibly gentle. "Look at me." The girl's tear-filled eyes lifted to his. "Is this man your father?" She shook her head violently, her voice breaking. "No, I don't know him." "You lying little..." The man started to move toward her, rage overtaking whatever survival instinct he'd been clinging to. Leo's hand shot out and caught him by the throat, slamming him against the brick wall hard enough to rattle his teeth. Antonio knelt slowly, making himself smaller, less threatening. He studied the girl's face, the terror, the desperate hope. The way she was trembling so hard her yellow dress seemed to vibrate. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Oh, Olivia," she whispered. "Olivia. That's a beautiful name." Antonio extended his hand toward her, not grabbing, not demanding, just offering. "I'm Antonio, and I promise you, nobody is going to hurt you anymore. But I need you to tell me the truth. Do you know this man?" Olivia shook her head again, harder this time. "Has he hurt you?" A small nod. Antonio's jaw flexed, but his voice remained gentle. "Where's your mother, Olivia?" She's at work. At the courthouse. She works late on Tuesdays." The words tumbled out in a rush, like she'd been holding them back for hours. "He took me from the playground. At the community center. He said he had something cool to show me, and I shouldn't have gone, but..." Her voice broke completely, dissolving into sobs. Antonio's eyes closed briefly. When they opened again, they were colder than ice, harder than stone. He stood slowly and turned to face the man still pinned against the wall. "You took her from a playground," Antonio said. It wasn't a question. The man's bravado crumbled. "Listen, you don't understand. I wasn't going to." "How long have you been watching her?" Silence. Antonio took another step closer. "How long?" "A few weeks," the man whispered, his voice barely audible. "A few weeks," Antonio repeated, his tone flat, emotionless, which somehow made it more terrifying. "You've been stalking an 8-year-old child for weeks, studying her routine, waiting for the right moment, and today, you finally worked up the courage to take her." The man tried to speak, but Leo's grip tightened. Antonio turned back to Olivia, who was hugging herself and shaking. "Olivia, come here, sweetheart. Come stand with me." She hesitated for only a heartbeat before stumbling forward. Antonio placed himself between her and the man, a human shield in an expensive suit. The man found his voice again, desperation, making it shrill. "You can't do this. There are cameras everywhere. People saw us. The police are watching you. They want any excuse to lock you up." Antonio's expression didn't change. "Then they can watch me save a child's life," he said quietly. "And you can explain to them why a grown man was dragging a terrified little girl into an alley." He glanced at Leo. "Call Detective Rowan. Tell him we have a gift-wrapped predator ready for pickup." The man's face transformed from desperate to terrified. "No, wait, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Antonio said. and the look in his eyes promised that this man's nightmare was just beginning. Antonio kept his body positioned between Olivia and the man, a living barrier that said more clearly than words, "You'll have to go through me first." The girl stood behind him, her small hand gripping the back of his coat so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She was still trembling, but the violent shaking had subsided slightly now that distance separated her from her abductor. Leo kept the man pinned against the brick wall, one forearm across his chest, while the other bodyguards maintained their positions at the alley entrance. No one was getting in. More importantly, no one was getting out. Antonio turned slowly, carefully lowering himself to one knee so he could meet Olivia's eyes at her level. Up close, he could see more details that made his stomach turn. Bruises on her wrist where fingers had gripped too hard, dirt smudged on her yellow dress, tear tracks cutting through the dust on her cheeks. Her hair had come partially loose from its ponytail, strands sticking to her face. She looked like a child who'd been fighting a war she was too young to understand. "Olivia," Antonio said gently, pulling a clean handkerchief from his pocket and offering it to her. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Can you do that for me?" She took the handkerchief with shaking hands and wiped her face, nodding slowly. "Take your time. Start from the beginning." Olivia's voice came out small and fractured, like broken glass trying to form words. I was at the community center, playing on the swings. My mom drops me there after school because she has to work late on Tuesdays." She glanced nervously at the man still pinned to the wall. He was watching me. I saw him. By the fence. He smiled at me. But it felt wrong." Antonio's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "Had you seen him before?" "Yes." The word came out as a whisper. "Lots of times. For many days. Maybe weeks. He was always there when I came to play. Always watching. My teacher says we should tell adults when someone makes us uncomfortable. But I thought maybe I was being silly." "You weren't being silly," Antonio said firmly. "Your instincts were right. What happened today?" Fresh tears spilled down Olivia's cheeks. "He came through the gate," he said. "He said he knew my mom. He said she sent him to pick me up because she had to work extra late. He knew her name. He knew where she worked. I thought..." Her voice broke completely. Antonio waited, giving her time. "I thought it was okay," she finally continued. "Because he knew things. But then we started walking, and he went the wrong way. I said, 'That's not where we live.' And he said we were taking a shortcut. But his hand got really tight. And when I tried to stop, he pulled me harder. That's when you made the signal," Antonio said quietly. Olivia nodded, wiping her eyes with the handkerchief. "We learned it at school, last month. A police officer came and taught us. She said if we're ever in danger and can't talk, we should make that signal. She said it only works if someone brave enough is looking." Something cracked in Antonio's chest, something he'd thought had calcified years ago. "You did exactly the right thing, Olivia. You were so smart. So brave." "I was scared," she whispered. "I didn't know if anyone would see it. I didn't know if anyone would care." "I saw it," Antonio said, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite suppress. "And I care." Behind them, the man finally found his voice again. "This is insane," she's confused. "Kids get confused. I was trying to help her." Antonio didn't even look back. "Leo, if he speaks again, make sure he can't." Leo's expression promised compliance. Silence fell over the alley. Antonio refocused on Olivia. "Where does your mom work?" "What's her name?" "Her name is Rebecca. Rebecca Daly. She works at the courthouse downtown, in the records department. She answers phones and files papers." Olivia's words came faster now, tumbling out like she'd been holding them back for hours. "She doesn't get home until 7:30 on Tuesdays. She doesn't know I'm gone yet. She's going to be so scared when she finds out." "We're going to call her," Antonio said firmly. "Right now. And we're going to tell her you're safe." "But..." Olivia glanced at the man again, fear flickering across her face. What if he comes back?" Antonio's expression hardened into something that would have terrified a grown man. "He won't." 2 words, but the absolute certainty in them made Olivia's shoulders relax slightly. "How can you be sure?" Antonio looked directly into her eyes, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of an unbreakable promise. "Because I'm going to make sure of it. And when I make a promise, Olivia, I keep it. Always." Olivia studied his face for a long moment, searching for something truth, maybe, or safety, or just the basic human decency to protect a child who'd already been failed by every adult who'd walked past her on that crowded street. Whatever she was looking for, she must have found it, because she nodded slowly, and then surprising even herself, she stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around Antonio's neck. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. Thank you for seeing me. Antonio closed his eyes briefly, one hand coming up to rest protectively on her back. I'll always see you, kid, he murmured. Always. And in that moment, Antonio Nelson made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Antonio stood slowly, keeping Olivia behind him, and finally turned his full attention to the man still pinned against the brick wall. Leo had eased his grip slightly, just enough to let the man breathe, but not enough to give him any illusions about escaping. The man's face had gone from defiant to desperate, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool evening air. Antonio walked toward him with the measured pace of someone who had all the time in the world. Each step echoed off the alley walls, a countdown to something the man was beginning to realize he couldn't escape. When Antonio stopped, he was close enough that the man could see every detail of his expression, and what he saw there made his breath catch. Antonio's face wasn't twisted with rage. He wasn't shouting or threatening. He was simply watching, calculating. The way a surgeon might study a patient before deciding where to make the first cut. Somehow, that was infinitely more terrifying. What's your name? Antonio asked quietly. The man's mouth opened, closed. I don't have to tell you anything. Wrong answer. Antonio's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Let's try again. What's your name? Silence. Antonio glanced at Leo, who applied pressure to a nerve cluster in the man's shoulder. The man gasped in pain, his knees buckling slightly. Derek, he choked out. Derek Hutchins. Derek Hutchins, Antonio repeated, as if committing it to memory. Why Olivia? I don't. Why that little girl? Antonio's voice sharpened like a blade finding its edge. Out of every child in this city, why her? What made you choose her? Derek's eyes darted between Antonio and the bodyguards, looking for any opening, any weakness. He found none. I want a lawyer, he tried. I have rights. You gave up your rights when you put your hands on a child. Antonio leaned in closer, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. Now answer my question. Why Olivia? The pressure from Leo increased. Derek's resolve crumbled like wet paper. She was alone a lot, he blurted out. At the community center. I watched her for weeks. Her mother worked late. No one picked her up right away. She'd play by herself, waiting. She looked easy. The word hung in the air like poison. Easy. As if an 8-year-old child was a target to be assessed for vulnerability. Antonio's hands curled into fists at his sides, but his voice remained eerily calm. How long have you been watching her? 6 weeks? Maybe 7. And in those 6 or 7 weeks, how many times did you approach her before today? Derek hesitated. Leo applied more pressure. 3 times. Derek gasped. 3 times. I talked to her. Asked her about school. About her mother. She told me things where they lived, what route they took home. I was just being friendly. Just talking. You were gathering intelligence. Antonio corrected coldly. Like a predator studying prey. You learned her schedule. Her mother's schedule. Where the gaps were. Where she'd be most vulnerable. Derek's face flushed with shame, anger, fear, a toxic cocktail that made his next words come out defensive and sharp. I wasn't going to hurt her. I just wanted... What? Antonio's voice cut through the excuse like a scalpel. What exactly did you want with an 8-year-old girl you'd been stalking for almost 2 months? Silence. Antonio stepped even closer. His face inches from Derek's now. Say it. Say what you were planning to do once you got her somewhere private. Somewhere no one could hear her scream. I wasn't... Say it. The roar came without warning, Antonio's control finally cracking just enough to let Derek see the violence simmering beneath his calm exterior. Derek flinched so hard he nearly collapsed. I don't know, he shouted back, tears streaming down his face now. I don't know what I was going to do. I couldn't stop watching her. I couldn't stop thinking about... He stopped himself, but it was too late. The confession was written all over his face. Antonio stepped back, disgust evident in every line of his body. Behind them, Olivia made a small sound, a whimper of fear mixed with relief that someone finally believed her when she said something was wrong. Derek's eyes found hers, and something desperate flashed across his face. Olivia, tell them I was nice to you. I gave you candy that one time, remember? I was just trying to be your friend. You were never my friend, Olivia said, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. You made me feel scared. Every time I saw you, I felt scared. Derek's face crumpled. You don't understand, he said, looking at Antonio now, with something like pleading. You don't understand what it's like, the thoughts. They don't stop. I tried to fight them. Then you should have gotten help, Antonio said flatly. Instead, you acted on them. You stalked a child. You took her. you would have destroyed her life. Derek's expression shifted again from pleading to something uglier, cornered desperation mixed with defiance. You can't kill me, he said, his voice gaining a tremor of confidence. Not here, not with cameras everywhere. The cops are already watching you. They'd love nothing more than to catch Antonio Nelson murdering someone in broad daylight. You're not stupid enough to give them that. Antonio's expression didn't change. You're right, he said quietly. I'm not. Derek's face flooded with relief. But who said anything about killing you? The relief vanished, and Derek Hutchins realized that death would have been the merciful option. Derek's relief transformed into confusion, then dawning horror as he processed Antonio's words. What do you mean? His voice cracked. Antonio didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts with deliberate slowness. Each second of silence made Derek more nervous, his eyes darting between the phone and Antonio's impassive face. Behind Antonio, Olivia watched with wide eyes, her small hand still clutching the back of his coat. Will he hurt me again? She whispered, the question so quiet Antonio almost didn't hear it. He turned slightly, meeting her frightened gaze, and his expression softened in a way that would have shocked anyone who knew his reputation. No, Olivia. He will never touch another child again. I promise you that. Are you... She hesitated, glancing at Derek. Are you going to kill him? The question hung in the alley like smoke. Everyone expected the answer to be yes. Leo and the other bodyguards had seen Antonio eliminate threats before. Derek expected it, his whole body was tensed for the inevitable. Even Olivia, despite her age, seemed to understand that men like Antonio Nelson didn't usually solve problems with phone calls and courtrooms. But Antonio surprised them all. No, he said quietly. I'm not. Derek's eyes widened in disbelief and desperate hope. Leo's eyebrows rose slightly, the only sign of his surprise. Olivia tilted her head, confused. Why not? Antonio knelt down again, bringing himself to her eye level. Because, Olivia, there are things worse than death. And I'm going to make sure Derek here experiences every single one of them for a very, very long time. He stood and pressed dial on his phone. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Nelson, this better be important. Detective Rowan, Antonio said, his tone businesslike. I have a situation that requires your immediate attention. What kind of situation? The detective's voice sharpened with suspicion. Antonio, if you're calling me, it means someone's either dead or about to be. Neither. I've apprehended a child predator. Active abduction. He took an 8-year-old girl from a community center playground after stalking her for approximately 6 to 7 weeks. Silence on the other end. Then, you're serious. Completely. The victim is safe with me. The perpetrator is secured. I need you to coordinate pickup and ensure this goes through proper channels. Antonio. Rowan's voice carried a mixture of disbelief and calculation. Why are you calling me? Why didn't you just handle this your way? Antonio glanced at Olivia, who was watching him with those big, trusting eyes that had somehow cracked through 2 decades of carefully constructed emotional armor. Because the victim deserves justice, he said simply. Real justice, not street justice. She deserves to know that the system protected her when it mattered. Derek made a strangled sound of protest. You can't, this is illegal detention kidnapping. Citizen's arrest, Antonio corrected without looking at him. You were witnessed committing a felony. Multiple witnesses, in fact. He gestured to his bodyguards, all of whom will provide statements. Rowan was quiet for a moment, processing. Where are you? Alley between Morrison and 5th. Behind the old textile warehouse. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Antonio, Rowan paused. Don't do anything before I get there. I won't need to, Antonio said. Just make sure he goes somewhere appropriate. Appropriate? Antonio's voice dropped lower, colder. Somewhere his crimes will be common knowledge. Somewhere the other inmates will know exactly what kind of monster they're living with. Understanding dawned in Rowan's voice. I can arrange that. I thought you might. Antonio ended the call and turned back to Derek, whose face had gone from hopeful to ashen. You're sending me to prison, Derek whispered. You're actually sending me to prison. General population, Antonio confirmed, where child predators receive special treatment from their fellow inmates. Every single day. Derek's knees buckled. Leo held him up. No, please, you don't understand, I'll be killed. Maybe, Antonio said with chilling indifference. Or maybe you'll just wish you were dead. Either way, you'll have years, possibly decades, to think about what you tried to do to Olivia. To think about all the other children you might have hurt if someone hadn't stopped you today. This is cruel, this is torture. Torture? Antonio's voice hardened. You traumatized an 8-year-old child. You stalked her for weeks. You stole her from a playground. You were dragging her into an alley, and you're talking to me about cruelty?" Derek had no answer. Olivia tugged on Antonio's coat. When he looked down, she was staring up at him with a mixture of confusion and something that might have been awe. "My teacher says revenge is wrong," she said quietly. "She says we should forgive people." Antonio considered his words carefully. "Your teacher is right about forgiveness," he said. "Forgiveness is for you, not for him. It helps you heal. But forgiveness doesn't mean there are no consequences. Derek made choices, terrible choices, and now he has to face what comes from those choices." "Will I be safe?" she asked, her voice small again. "Really safe?" Antonio placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You'll be safe, Olivia. He'll never get near you again. I'll make sure of it." In the distance, sirens began to wail. Derek's face crumpled as the reality of his situation fully sank in. Antonio felt no pity, only the grim satisfaction of knowing that justice, real, lasting justice, was finally coming for a predator who'd thought himself untouchable. And for the first time in 20 years, Antonio Nelson chose the law over the gun. The sirens grew louder, blue and red lights painting the alley entrance in alternating flashes of color. Leo and the other bodyguards shifted positions smoothly, creating a clear path for law enforcement, while maintaining control over Derek, who was now openly sobbing against the brick wall. Antonio felt Olivia tense beside him, her small body going rigid at the sound of approaching authorities. "It's okay," he murmured, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "These are the good guys. They're here to help. But what if they don't believe me?" Her voice trembled. "What if they think I'm lying? What if they make me go with him?" Antonio knelt down once more, holding her gaze with steady certainty. "Olivia, look at me. Nobody is making you go anywhere with him ever again. I promise you that. And if anyone tries, they'll have to go through me first." 3 police cruisers pulled up at the alley entrance, followed by an unmarked sedan. Detective Rowan emerged from the sedan, a gray-haired man in his 50s with sharp eyes and the weathered face of someone who'd seen too much of humanity's dark side. His gaze swept the scene. Antonio in his expensive suit, the bodyguards, Derek pinned against the wall, and finally Olivia in her dirty yellow dress, clinging to Antonio's coat like a lifeline. Rowan's expression hardened when he saw the girl. "Antonio," he said, his voice neutral but his eyes communicating volumes. He approached slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. "Miss, I'm Detective Rowan. Are you hurt?" Olivia shook her head but didn't speak. "Her name is Olivia Daly," Antonio said quietly. 8 years old. He took her from the community center playground approximately 2 hours ago after stalking her for 6 to 7 weeks. "She's frightened, but physically unharmed as far as I can determine." Rowan nodded, signaling to the uniformed officers. "Secure the suspect. Read him his rights." 2 officers moved in, taking custody of Derek from Leo. As they handcuffed him, Derek started shouting a desperate stream of denials and accusations. "This is illegal detention. That man assaulted me. He threatened to kill me. I have rights. I want my lawyer. This is entrapment. Save it for booking," one officer said flatly, not bothering to hide his disgust as he caught sight of Olivia's tear-stained face. Rowan turned his attention fully to Olivia, lowering himself to her level the same way Antonio had. "Olivia, I need to ask you some questions. Is that okay?" She looked up at Antonio uncertainly. "It's okay," Antonio told her gently. "Detective Rowan is someone I trust. You can talk to him. Will you stay?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Something in Antonio's chest tightened. "If that's what you want, then yes, I'll stay." Rowan conducted the initial interview right there in the alley, his questions careful and age-appropriate. Olivia answered haltingly at first. Then with growing confidence as she realized people were finally listening to her, she told him about the weeks of surveillance, the conversations Derek had initiated, the way he'd known personal details about her life. She described how he'd approached her at the playground today, claiming her mother had sent him, how his grip had tightened when she tried to pull away, how she'd remembered the rescue signal from school. "And that's when you saw Mr. Nelson?" Rowan asked. Olivia nodded. "He was the only one who looked. Everyone else just walked by. But he saw me. He saw my signal." Rowan glanced at Antonio, something unreadable in his expression. "We need to contact her mother," Antonio said. "Rebecca Daly. She works in the records department at the downtown courthouse." "Already on it," Rowan replied, standing and making a call. While they waited, a female officer approached with a blanket and a bottle of water for Olivia. She accepted both gratefully, wrapping herself in the warmth. Antonio's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, messages from his business associates, wondering where he'd disappeared to, and silenced it without responding. Right now, nothing else mattered. 10 minutes later, a car screeched to a halt at the alley entrance. A woman in business casual attire practically fell out of the driver's seat, her face a mask of terror and desperate hope. Olivia. Mom! Olivia broke away from Antonio and ran toward her mother, who collapsed to her knees and caught her daughter in an embrace so fierce it looked like she'd never let go. Rebecca Daly sobbed into her daughter's hair, her whole body shaking. Oh God. Oh my baby, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. It's okay, Mama, Olivia whispered, crying too now. I'm okay. He saved me. Antonio saved me. Rebecca looked up through her tears, her gaze finding Antonio standing in the shadows of the alley. For a moment, their eyes met. She knew who he was. Everyone in the city knew Antonio Nelson's face, his reputation, the whispers about what he did to people who crossed him. But none of that mattered now. She carefully extracted herself from Olivia and walked toward Antonio on unsteady legs. Before he could say anything, she threw her arms around him, sobbing against his chest. Thank you, she choked out. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, you saved my daughter. You saved my baby. Antonio stood frozen for a moment, unused to this kind of contact, this kind of raw gratitude. Then slowly, carefully, he placed one hand on Rebecca's shoulder. She saved herself, he said quietly. She was smart enough to signal for help, brave enough to trust a stranger. I just happened to be the one looking. Rebecca pulled back, wiping her eyes, studying his face. You're not what they say you are, she whispered. Antonio's expression didn't change. Yes, I am, he said. But maybe not only that. And for the first time, Antonio wondered if that might actually be true. The story broke before sunrise. By 6 a.m., every news station in the city was running the same headline. Mafia boss saves abducted child predator, arrested after weeks of stalking. Security footage from downtown businesses had captured everything: the crowded street, the little girl in the yellow dress, the tattooed man gripping her wrist, and Antonio Nelson stopping cold in the middle of the sidewalk, surrounded by his bodyguards, before following them into the alley. The footage went viral within hours. Antonio sat in his penthouse apartment, watching the coverage with the same detached calm he brought to everything else in his life. His coffee had gone cold on the table beside him, untouched. On screen, a news anchor with perfectly styled hair and practiced concern was narrating the footage. What witnesses are calling an act of unexpected heroism from a man better known for his alleged connections to organized crime. 8-year-old Olivia Daly is safe tonight because Antonio Nelson, described by law enforcement as a high-ranking figure in the city's criminal underworld, recognized a silent distress signal and intervened. The anchor cut to footage of Detective Rowan giving a press conference outside the police station. Rowan looked tired, but his voice was steady. Without Mr. Nelson's intervention, this situation would have ended very differently. The suspect, Derek Hutchins, has a history of complaints related to suspicious behavior around children, complaints that, unfortunately, never resulted in charges. Yesterday, he escalated to abduction. If not for a vigilant citizen recognizing the victim's distress signal, we'd likely be investigating a missing child case right now, instead of celebrating her safe recovery. A reporter shouted a question. Detective, are you calling Antonio Nelson a hero? Rowan's expression became carefully neutral. I'm saying he did the right thing when it mattered. Whatever else Mr. Nelson may or may not be involved in, yesterday he saved a child's life. That's a fact. Another reporter. Will there be any charges against Mr. Nelson for detaining the suspect? The district attorney's office has reviewed the circumstances and determined that Mr. Nelson's actions constitute a legal citizen's arrest. No charges will be filed. The press erupted with more questions, but Rowan stepped away from the podium. Antonio's phone had been ringing constantly since the story broke. His business associates, his legal team, even rivals from competing organizations, everyone wanted to know what the hell he'd been thinking, risking exposure, risking scrutiny. For a kid he didn't even know, he'd ignored every call. Except one. His phone buzzed again, and this time he answered. Vincent? He said. Vincent ran his West Side operations and had been with him for 15 years. Boss, have you seen the news? I'm watching it now. The DA's office is sniffing around, using this as an excuse to dig into your activities. They're calling it renewed public interest. 3 of our delivery points have been watched since dawn. 2 suppliers are nervous about the attention. Antonio sipped his cold coffee, grimacing. Tell the suppliers to relax. Tell our people to operate clean for the next 2 weeks. The spotlight will move on. And if it doesn't, then we adapt. We've handled scrutiny before. Vincent hesitated. Boss, was it worth it? All this heat? For one kid? Antonio's gaze drifted to the window, looking out over the city as dawn light turned the sky pink and gold. Yes, he said simply. It was worth it. He ended the call. By noon, the city was divided. Social media exploded with debates. Half the city was calling Antonio a hero, proof that even people with dark pasts could do good when it mattered. The other half argued he was using Olivia as a publicity stunt, trying to rehabilitate his image while continuing criminal activities behind the scenes. At City Mom Advocate tweeted, "I don't care what Antonio Nelson does for a living. He saved that little girl when no one else stopped. That's a hero in my book." At Law and Order Fan replied, "Heroes don't run criminal empires. Don't let one good deed erase years of illegal activity." The debate raged in comment sections, on talk radio, in coffee shops across the city. Law enforcement was equally divided. In a meeting room at the precinct, Captain Morris slammed his fist on the table. "This is our chance." Nelson handed himself to us on a silver platter. Every camera in the city caught him interfering with what should have been a police matter. "He saved a child," Detective Rowan interrupted, his voice hard. "A child who would be God knows where right now if he hadn't acted. That doesn't give him the right to play vigilante. He didn't play anything. He detained a suspect and called us. That's textbook citizen's arrest." "It's convenient," Morris snapped. "Convenient timing, convenient optics, convenient way to make the public forget he's a criminal." "The public isn't forgetting anything," Rowan said. "They're just seeing what I saw in that alley, a man who stopped a predator when everyone else walked by. You want to arrest him for that? Go ahead. See how that plays in the media." Morris glared at him but said nothing. The silence spoke volumes. By evening, Antonio's attorney called with an update. "The DA's office is opening an investigation," she said without preamble, using the media attention as justification. "They're going to audit your businesses, interview your associates, look for anything they can use." "Let them look," Antonio said. "Everything is clean enough to pass scrutiny." "Clean enough isn't the same as clean, Antonio. It'll have to do." His attorney sighed. "There's something else. The Hutchins family is threatening to sue. They're claiming you assaulted Derek during the detention, caused emotional distress, violated his rights." "Let them try," Antonio said coldly. "Every second of that encounter is on video, multiple angles. If they want to argue I was too rough with a child predator who was actively fleeing with his victim, they can make that case in court." "You're not concerned? About the Hutchins family?" "No." "About increased law enforcement attention?" "That's manageable." "About doing the right thing?" He paused. "I have no regrets." His attorney was quiet for a moment. "You're different, Antonio. Since yesterday, I can hear it in your voice." "Maybe," he admitted. "Or maybe I'm just tired of pretending everything is fine when it's not." "What does that mean?" "It means I've spent 20 years building something dark, and yesterday a little girl reminded me what light looks like. I'm still processing what to do with that information." After the call ended, Antonio stood at his window, watching the city lights begin to twinkle as dusk settled over downtown. Somewhere out there, Olivia Daly was home, safe, probably having dinner with her mother. She'd never know how much she'd changed by simply being brave enough to ask for help. She'd never know that Antonio had already assigned 2 of his most trusted people to quietly watch her neighborhood, ensure her safety, make certain Derek Hutchins' associates, if he had any, never came near her. She'd never know that Antonio had anonymously paid 6 months of her mother's rent, covered therapy costs for both of them, and arranged for upgraded security at their apartment building. The city could debate his morality all they wanted. Antonio knew what he was. But maybe, just maybe, he was also becoming something more. 3 days later, Antonio received an envelope delivered by courier. Inside was a crayon drawing. It showed 2 figures, one small in a yellow dress, one tall in a black suit holding hands. Above them, a child's handwriting read, "Thank you for seeing me. Love, Olivia." Antonio stared at that drawing for a long time. Then carefully, reverently, he placed it in a frame on his desk, where he could see it every day. A reminder that in a life defined by darkness, he'd managed at least once to bring a child back into the light. And somehow, that mattered more than anything else he'd ever done. Derek Hutchins learned very quickly that prison was exactly as terrible as Antonio Nelson had promised it would be. The intake process at Riverside Correctional Facility was designed to strip away identity, dignity, and any illusions about what life behind bars would be like. Derek stood in a line of new inmates, all wearing identical orange jumpsuits, all looking equally terrified or resigned to their fates. But Derek's terror was unique, because word had already spread about what he'd done. The corrections officer processing his paperwork barely looked at him as he read the charges aloud. Attempted kidnapping of a minor, child endangerment, felony stalking, criminal restraint. The officer's jaw tightened. Cell block D, general population. Derek's blood ran cold. "Wait, I need protective custody. I have a right." "Protective custody is full," the officer said flatly. though his expression suggested that even if it weren't, Derek wouldn't be getting a spot. You'll be placed in general population pending review. Review? How long does review take? Could be weeks, could be months. The officer's smile was cruel. Depends on how backed up the system is. Derek was escorted to cell block D by 2 guards who walked just slightly too fast, forcing him to stumble to keep up. The cell block was a 3-tier structure with cells lining both sides of a central common area. The noise hit him first, shouting, laughter, the clang of metal on metal, the constant underlying hum of hundreds of men living in confined spaces. Then the smell, sweat, industrial cleaner, something sour and indefinable. The guards led him past cells where inmates pressed against the bars, watching with predatory interest. Fresh meat, someone called out. What you in for, newbie? Derek kept his eyes down, his whole body trembling. One of the guards smirked. Hutchins here likes little girls. Tried to snatch an 8-year-old off a playground. The cell block went silent, then erupted. The shouting was immediate, and vicious threats, curses, promises of what would happen to him. Inmates banged on their bars, creating a deafening cacophony of rage. Derek's legs nearly gave out. The guards deposited him in a cell on the 2nd tier and locked the door without another word. His cellmate, a man in his 40s with prison tattoos covering his arms, was sitting on the bottom bunk, watching Derek with cold calculation. So, the man said slowly, you're the one. Derek pressed himself against the far wall. I don't want any trouble. Don't matter what you want. Trouble's already found you. The man stood, and Derek realized he was easily 6'3", all muscle and menace. Name's Collins. And before you get any ideas, I'm in here for armed robbery. Not a violent guy, normally, but I got 2 daughters on the outside, 8 and 11. Derek's mouth went dry. I'm gonna make this real simple, Collins continued. You stay on your bunk. You don't talk to me. You don't look at me. You don't breathe too loud. And when the opportunity presents itself, and it will, I'm gonna look the other way while certain people teach you what happens to chomos in here. Chomos? Child molesters, Collins said flatly. Even murderers got standards, man. But people like you, you're at the bottom of the food chain, lower than rats. That first night, Derek didn't sleep at all. He lay on the top bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to Collins's steady breathing below, and the sounds of the cell block sounds that seemed to promise violence, just waiting for the right moment. The violence came on his 3rd day. Derek was in the common area during recreation time, trying to make himself invisible in a corner. He'd learned quickly that eye contact was dangerous, that showing fear was dangerous, that existing was dangerous. He saw them coming but had nowhere to run. 3 men, all serving time for various violent offenses, all with the same cold purpose in their eyes. The first punch caught him in the stomach, doubling him over. The second hit his jaw, snapping his head back. He fell, and the kicks began ribs, back, kidneys, calculated strikes that wouldn't leave visible bruises but would hurt for weeks. This is for every kid you ever looked at wrong, one of them hissed. This is for that little girl in the yellow dress. Derek tried to curl into a ball, tried to protect himself, but there were too many of them and they knew exactly where to hit to cause maximum pain. The guards eventually intervened, eventually being the operative word. They took their time walking over, giving the inmates plenty of opportunity to deliver their message. Derek was dragged to the medical wing with 3 cracked ribs, a split lip, and bruises covering most of his torso. The doctor who examined him was perfunctory, clinical, completely unsympathetic. You'll live, he said. You'll be sore for a month, but nothing's permanently damaged. I need protective custody, Derek begged through swollen lips. Please, they're going to kill me. Protective custody is full, but they're going to... Then I suggest you learn to keep your head down. The doctor finished his examination and called for the guards. He's cleared to return to general population. Derek wanted to scream, to beg, to demand his rights, but he'd learned enough to know that inside these walls, he had no rights that anyone felt obligated to respect. Weeks passed. The beatings continued, never severe enough to warrant investigation, always just violent enough to remind Derek of his place in the prison hierarchy. His cellmate Collins kept his word about looking the other way. Derek stopped eating in the cafeteria after someone put something in his food that left him vomiting for 2 days. He survived on commissary items he bought with money his family sent, though those packages grew smaller and less frequent as the weeks wore on. His public defender visited once, bringing bad news. The prosecution is offering a plea deal. 12 years, eligible for parole in 8 if you behave. 12 years? Derek's voice cracked. I didn't hurt her. You stalked her for weeks and abducted her from a public playground. You're lucky the DA isn't pushing for 20. The jury will see that security footage, and they won't have any sympathy. Take the deal. Derek thought about 8 years in this place, 8 years of watching his back every second. 8 years of violence and fear and degradation. What if I don't take it? Then you go to trial, and you'll probably get 15 to 20. Plus, trial means more media coverage, more people knowing your face, your name, your crimes. You really want that? Derek signed the plea agreement with shaking hands. 6 months into his sentence, Derek received a message. It came through another inmate, a man who worked in the administrative offices and had access to information most prisoners didn't. "Someone's been paying attention to you," the man said during yard time, his voice low. "Someone on the outside making sure people in here know exactly what you did." Derek's blood turned to ice. "Who? Does it matter? Point is, you're never going to be safe here. Not in Gen Pop, not in protective custody if you ever get it, not anywhere in the system. Someone wants you to suffer for a long, long time." Derek didn't need to ask who that someone was. He'd known since the moment Antonio Nelson looked at him in that alley and said death would have been merciful. That night, lying on his bunk covered in fresh bruises from another accidental encounter, Derek finally understood what true punishment meant. It wasn't execution. It wasn't even imprisonment. It was waking up every single day knowing you were trapped in hell with no escape, no hope, no end in sight except the slow, grinding march of years that would strip away everything you were until only suffering remained. Antonio Nelson had promised him justice, and Antonio Nelson had kept his promise. 3 months after that night in the alley, Antonio Nelson sat in his office reviewing reports from his West Side operations when Detective Rowan called. "Thought you'd want an update," Rowan said without preamble. "Hutchins took a plea deal. 12 years, eligible for parole in 8. Antonio leaned back in his chair. "How's he adjusting to prison life?" There was a pause. "About as well as you'd expect for a child predator in general population. Medical records show he's been to the infirmary 11 times in 6 months. Broken ribs, contusions, split lip. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to make his existence miserable. Good. Antonio, you wouldn't happen to know anything about why certain information about Hutchins' crimes keeps circulating through the prison population, would you?" "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Right." Rowan's tone suggested he knew exactly what Antonio had done but wasn't planning to investigate further. "There's something else. The Daly family, Rebecca and Olivia, they've been asking about you." Antonio straightened slightly. "Asking what?" "Asking if you're okay. If there's been any legal trouble because of what happened. Rebecca called 3 times, wanting to know if there was anything she could do to help if the DA came after you." Something warm and unfamiliar stirred in Antonio's chest. "Tell her I'm fine. No legal trouble. You tell her yourself." She left her number. After the call ended, Antonio stared at the phone number Rowan had texted him. He could have one of his people handle this, send flowers, a polite note, maintain appropriate distance. Instead, he picked up his phone and dialed. Rebecca answered on the second ring. "Hello? Mrs. Daly, this is Antonio Nelson." "Oh," her voice brightened immediately. "Mr. Nelson, Antonio, I'm so glad you called. I've been worried about you." "Worried about me?" "I saw the news coverage. All the scrutiny from law enforcement, people questioning your motives. I wanted you to know that Olivia and I would testify on your behalf if you needed us to. You saved my daughter's life. The least I can do is help protect yours." Antonio found himself momentarily speechless. "That's very kind of you," he managed. "But it won't be necessary. The situation has been resolved." "Still," Rebecca said firmly, "the offer stands. For anything. Anytime." They talked for a few more minutes, surface-level conversation about how Olivia was doing better every day. Starting therapy, back in school, how Rebecca was handling everything, taking it one day at a time, installed new locks, taking self-defense classes. Before ending the call, Rebecca said something that stayed with Antonio long after they hung up. "Olivia talks about you constantly. She tells everyone about the man who saw her signal. She thinks you're a superhero." Antonio's throat tightened. "I'm not a hero, Mrs. Daly. Maybe not to everyone," Rebecca said softly. "But you are to us." Over the following months, Antonio did something he'd never done before he stayed connected. Not directly. He was careful about that. But through Rowan, through discreet inquiries, through occasional anonymous gifts that arrived at the Daly apartment, he kept track of how Olivia was recovering. He learned that she'd had nightmares for the first month, but they were becoming less frequent. He learned that she'd started a school project teaching other students about the rescue signal. He learned that Rebecca had been struggling to pay for therapy sessions and rent simultaneously, so Antonio anonymously covered 6 months of rent and made sure a local nonprofit selected Olivia for a grant that covered her therapy costs. He learned that their apartment building's security was inadequate, so the building suddenly received an anonymous donation to upgrade their camera systems and add better lighting to the parking garage. He learned that Rebecca's car had broken down, threatening her ability to get to work, so a local mechanic called saying someone had prepaid for all necessary repairs. Rebecca suspected, of course. The timing was too convenient. But she never said anything. Never tried to track down the source of their sudden good fortune. She just accepted it with quiet gratitude and made sure Olivia was thriving. 4 months after the alley, Antonio did something else unprecedented. He drove to Olivia's elementary school during dismissal time and parked across the street, watching from a distance as children poured out of the building in chaotic waves of energy and noise. He spotted Olivia immediately, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, her backpack almost bigger than she was, walking hand in hand with Rebecca toward their car. She was laughing at something her mother said. Laughing. The sound carried across the street, and Antonio felt that unfamiliar warmth in his chest again. She was okay. Not just surviving, but actually okay. As they reached their car, Olivia suddenly stopped and looked around, her head turning as if she sensed something. Antonio ducked lower in his seat, but not before her eyes swept past his vehicle. For just a moment, he could have sworn she smiled as if she somehow knew he was there, watching over her like he'd promised. Then Rebecca called her name, and Olivia climbed into the car, the moment passing. Antonio waited until they drove away before starting his engine. That night, sitting in his penthouse with the city lights spread out below him, Antonio thought about the paths his life could have taken. He'd chosen crime because it offered power, control, respect through fear. He'd built an empire on violence and intimidation, but he'd also saved a little girl from a monster. And somehow, that single act had shifted something fundamental inside him. He wasn't going to abandon his organization, wasn't naive enough to think one good deed erased decades of darkness. But maybe, he thought, there was room for both. Maybe Antonio Nelson could still be the man who controlled the West Side, and also be the man who made sure children like Olivia Daly stayed safe. His phone buzzed with a message from Vincent about a shipment delay. Antonio responded quickly, efficiently, slipping back into his role as crime boss. But before turning in for the night, he walked to his desk and looked at the framed crayon drawing Olivia had sent. 2 figures holding hands, one small, one tall. "Stay safe, little one," he murmured, and he meant it with everything he was. 6 months after that night in the alley, Olivia Daly stood backstage at her elementary school auditorium, nervously smoothing down her yellow dress. Not the same yellow dress that one had been thrown away, too many bad memories attached to fabric. This was a new one, brighter, with small sunflowers embroidered along the hem. Her mother had bought it specifically for today. "You ready, sweetie?" Mrs. Patterson, her teacher, knelt beside her with an encouraging smile. Olivia nodded, though her hands were shaking slightly. "I think so. You're going to do great. Just remember, you're not just telling your story, you're teaching them something that could save their lives someday. That's a big deal." "I know." Olivia took a deep breath. "That's why I have to do it right." Through the curtain, she could hear the auditorium filling with students, teachers, and parents attending the school's safety awareness assembly. Every grade was represented, kindergarten through 5th grade, all gathered to learn about personal safety. Olivia's mother was sitting in the front row, smiling encouragingly. But Olivia found herself scanning the back of the auditorium, looking for someone else. Looking for him. She hadn't seen Antonio Nelson since that night. He hadn't visited, hadn't called, hadn't appeared at her school or her home. But she felt his presence anyway in the way her mother suddenly stopped worrying about rent, in the new security cameras at their building, in the therapy sessions they could somehow afford. Her mother had said it was grants and good luck. Olivia knew better. Principal Hernandez took the stage, tapping the microphone to get everyone's attention. "Good morning, students and parents. Today we have a very special assembly about personal safety. We're going to learn about the rescue signal, a silent way to ask for help when you're in danger. And we have a very brave young lady here to teach you. Please welcome Olivia Daly." Applause filled the auditorium as Olivia walked onto the stage, her legs feeling like jelly. The lights were bright. The crowd was bigger than she'd expected. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her. Then she saw her mother in the front row, pressing her hand to her heart. And somehow, that gave Olivia the courage to begin. "Hi," she said, her voice small but clear. "My name is Olivia, and I'm in 3rd grade. 6 months ago, something scary happened to me. A stranger took me from my playground." The auditorium went completely silent. Even the kindergartners stopped fidgeting. For weeks before that, this man had been watching me, talking to me sometimes, learning things about me and my family. I felt uncomfortable around him, but I didn't say anything because I thought maybe I was just being silly. Olivia paused, remembering Mrs. Patterson's advice to make eye contact with the audience. But I wasn't being silly. My feelings were trying to warn me that something was wrong, and the day he took me, I was really, really scared. I couldn't scream because he said if I made noise, he'd hurt my mom. I couldn't run because he was stronger than me. But I remembered something I learned in a police officer's presentation at school. She raised her right hand, demonstrating slowly. This is called the rescue signal. You take your hand, like this, with your palm facing out. Then you tuck your thumb into your palm, she demonstrated, and fold your fingers down over it, like you're trapping your thumb. Around the auditorium, students began practicing the gesture, their small hands mimicking hers. You hold it for 3 seconds where someone can see it, then lower your hand. It's a silent way to tell someone, I'm in danger, please help me. But here's the important part. Olivia's voice grew stronger. It only works if someone brave enough is looking. She scanned the back of the auditorium again, and this time, she saw him. Antonio Nelson stood in the shadows near the exit, partially hidden by the doorframe. He wore a dark suit, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. But his eyes were focused entirely on her with an intensity that felt protective rather than frightening. Their gazes met for just a moment. Olivia smiled. Antonio's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Then Olivia continued her presentation, telling her story with increasing confidence how she'd made the signal, how a man had seen it and followed her, how he'd stopped the person taking her and made sure she got home safely. I don't remember everything that happened that night, she said honestly. Some of it's still fuzzy. But I remember feeling like nobody in the whole world cared that I was scared. And then suddenly someone did. Someone saw me when everyone else was just walking by. She demonstrated the signal again, encouraging all the students to practice with her. If you're ever in danger, if someone makes you uncomfortable, if you're being taken somewhere you don't want to go, if you need help but can't speak, use this signal. Hold your hand where people can see it, and hope that someone brave enough is watching. Her voice dropped slightly, becoming more serious. But also, be the person who's watching. Pay attention to people around you. Notice when something seems wrong. Don't just walk by because it's not your problem. Because someday, you might be the only person who can help someone who really, really needs it. The auditorium erupted in applause, not the polite clapping of a school assembly, but genuine, enthusiastic appreciation. Olivia stepped back, feeling tears prick her eyes as she took in the crowd of students all practicing the signal, all learning something that might save their lives someday. Her mother was crying openly in the front row. Mrs. Patterson was beaming with pride. And in the back of the auditorium, Antonio Nelson gave her the smallest nod, acknowledgement, approval, respect, before turning and slipping out the door. Olivia wanted to call out to him, to run after him, to thank him properly for everything he'd done. But somehow she understood that wasn't what he wanted. He didn't need public thanks or recognition. He just needed to know she was okay. And now, watching her teach hundreds of children how to protect themselves, he did. Outside the school, Antonio walked to his car parked half a block away. His bodyguards waited by the vehicle, giving him space. He paused before getting in, looking back at the school building where Olivia's voice still carried faintly through the open auditorium doors. She was okay, not just surviving, but thriving, using her trauma to help others, turning her fear into power, becoming exactly the kind of brave, resilient person the world needed more of. Antonio had saved her life that night in the alley. But watching her today, he realized something profound. She'd saved something in him too. Leo approached quietly. Everything all right, boss? Antonio nodded slowly, still looking at the school. Yeah, he said softly. Everything's all right. He climbed into the SUV, and the convoy pulled away from the curb, heading back into the city where Antonio Nelson had built his empire on darkness and fear. But now, tucked away in that darkness, was a single point of light, a little girl in a yellow dress who'd reminded him that even men like him could choose to do the right thing when it mattered. Antonio pulled out his phone and sent a single text to Detective Rowan. She did great today. Rowan's response came quickly. She's remarkable. You did good, Antonio. Antonio stared at those words, you did good, for a long moment. In his world, good was relative. Survival was measured in power and fear. Morality was a luxury most couldn't afford. But maybe, just maybe, there was room for both versions of himself to exist. The man who protected his territory with ruthless efficiency, and the man who'd promised a terrified child she'd never be hurt again. As the convoy disappeared into downtown traffic, Antonio looked at the crayon drawing still displayed on his phone's lock screen, 2 figures holding hands, one small and one tall. A reminder that in a life measured by darkness, he'd managed to bring one child back into the light. And that, he thought, was worth more than any empire he'd ever built. In the months and years that followed, Antonio Nelson remained exactly what he'd always been feared, powerful, untouchable in his corner of the city. But occasionally, late at night when the streets were empty and the city lights reflected off rain-slicked pavement, He would drive past Olivia Daly's neighborhood, not to interfere, not to intrude, just to make sure the lights were on, to make sure she was safe, to make sure the promise he'd made in a dark alley 6 months ago remained unbroken. Because Antonio Nelson was many things, but above all else, he was a man who kept his word. Thanks for sticking with this story till the end. If you enjoyed it, you're going to love the next one. It's packed with unexpected turns and heartfelt moments. Click the image on your screen to keep the journey going, and make sure to hit subscribe for more amazing stories. Drop a comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I can't wait to see what you think.